we have Lisa coming from Singapore to talk about evaluating economic risks for protocols. And as always, fun fact about Lisa, she has actually lived in 6 different countries already. I've only lived in America. So Lisa, welcome.
Hi everyone, good afternoon and good morning. I really enjoyed Sal's pitch because Sal talked about how do you pitch, and today I'm going to talk to you about how to build, how to analyze, how to build something robust so that you can pitch something relevant to your investors. So show of hands, who here are founders? Good. And who here are investors? VC, investors, angels. Okay, that's also good. The rest of you guys, where are you guys from? Are you in marketing? Are you in sales?
Business development.
BD, okay, great. Marketing, all right. So this is also relevant to marketing, to founders, and to VCs. So today I want to talk a little bit more about how to analyze economic risks. And something that I realized is this thing doesn't work again. Okay, great. So I want to cover couple of things today. Firstly is the risk types in Web3. In Web3, we talk a lot about different kind of risks, financial risks and smart contract risks. So I want to dive deep a little bit more into understanding what are the options of risks available in Web3 and how do we analyze them. Then I want to get started with understanding economic risks, something that I want to focus on in this session. Why should we care about economic risks? How do we look at designing and analyzing them? And how do we design an economy, a robust economy? So to begin, there are 3 kinds of risks in crypto, in Web3. And people typically talk about the first 2. So the first one is financial risk. And this is typical. This is typical of Web2. You have financial audit, and you have P&L kind of risk. You have managerial accounting to understand the financial risk the company is facing. You have this for early stage startup, for big enterprises. And this is nothing new. We have that in crypto as well. The assets might be a bit different. Instead of calculating things in US dollars, you have to calculate it in your own tokens, perhaps. But it doesn't stray away from the core fundamental of finance as a risk. The second thing we look at is technological risks, technical risks. This is where smart contract auditors come in and understand bugs, understand different kind of exploits that's embedded within the code. This is something new for technology firms. You don't have that in FMB, you don't have that so much in FMCG. Here is very specific to technology. In Web3, it's even more complex because everything is open source and people can fork the code very easily. So technological risks, technical risks, are actually very important. And we have dedicated smart contract companies doing that. Now, the third risk that I want to introduce is economic risk. And this is a risk that is quite new in these ecosystems that we're building. Because today, we're building a brand new world, a brand new country, a brand new planet, a brand new economy. Here, it's not just about code and exploits and bug in the code. It's not just about how people manage money. But here we're talking about how rules are being defined. What can people do in the system? What can people not do in the system? How do people interact and collaborate with each other in the ecosystem? These are all the rules embedded within economics. We talk about tokens as programmable money. That programmability is the economic rules we embed within the system. And this is a big, big risk that's very new to a Web3 system. It's not specific to Web3, it's any economy that is being built, any private or public goods economy where people get to come in and interact with each other. You create a market. In a market, you have an economy. And that is the economic risks we're talking about. So today I want to focus very much on economic risk. When we look at financial risk, you can look at countless of books. You can go to school for that. There are a lot of ways to analyze financial risk. When it comes to technological risks, that's where a lot of smart contract firms are doing, audit firms are doing, and you can read a lot of their reports and go to Twitter to understand them. Financial risks, on the other hand, is something quite new. Economic risk is something quite new. It's quite specific to Web3, and this is the part that I want to dive into. So before we get started, I introduced this yesterday in my talk, but just for everyone in the room, how do we analyze and how do we build a robust economic model? The truth is that there is no one model that fits everything. There is no one answer, one model that fits the best economic model in the world. If we have that, we won't have different economic systems in Argentina, in Brazil, in Portugal, in China, in the US. Because every economic system is dependent and reflective of what kind of market structures we have, what kind of economic agents we have in the space. So with that in mind, I want to introduce a framework instead. And this framework is going to be very important because this framework is the framework of how we build systems and how we analyze economic risks. This framework is something that I've worked on for 7 years now, and I've created a book. All the clients that we've worked with around the world, whether they're big enterprises, games, or Web3 companies, we all use this framework. So this framework is very relevant and very useful in all kinds of situations. So let's take a quick 2 minutes to go through how this works. You see that there are 3 pillars there. You've got market, mechanism, and token design. If you think from a macro to micro perspective, it's like a big funnel. Market defines the macro structure, the big economy. What kind of market are we talking about? Who is in the market? Who are the economic agents in the market? What can people do in the market? What kind of behaviors we want to incentivize? The market is to create the parameters of what is in this economy that we're talking about. This is very relevant to your business model, your revenue stream. Who are your competitors? Who are your stakeholders? Who is in the value chain? Distill that all to part of your economic model. Second thing is mechanism design. It's the micro part. It's the moving towards the micro. Mechanism design talks about the incentives. So what are the rules that people need to follow to trade and interact? The thing is, at the end of the day, economics are incentives and disincentives to drive people to behave in a certain way. So we are creating the right kind of incentives to allow people to behave, to allow people to participate. Yes, we want voting, we want governance, we want people to vote on whatever decisions we want to make. That is a good behavior, and we're creating the incentives and disincentives to allow them to participate, to signal their preference of voting, to signal and weed out bad behaviors and bad actors in the system. We talk about non-financial incentives and different kind of bargaining structure to allow people to coordinate and collaborate in the system. So that's the middle part, incentive design, mechanism design. And lastly, we finally talk about tokens. So realize that the first 2 pillars, we didn't even talk about tokens. Do you need a token to create an ecosystem? You don't need a token. You can have an ecosystem without tokens. That being said, an ecosystem, a robust economy, has to have a market. If you have no market, if you have no one here, there's nothing to design for. You need to have incentives because people will always behave and interact in whatever way they deem fit. And as an economist, we're creating the barriers and rules and boundaries for them to interact. And lastly, tokens. Tokens can be fungible, non-fungible, tradable, non-tradable. Tokens can represent reputation. Token can represent money. Token can represent equity that increases in value. It can be a store of value. It can be a medium of exchange. It does not matter. Because tokens over here are a means to an end. The end is how people behave and interact in your system. In any ecosystems that we're talking about, the main thing we want to drive is user retention and user acquisition. Tokens, economy, all these are driving forces to get people to interact more, to increase user retention and user acquisition. And economy helps to build around that. So with that in mind, how do we understand the economic risks based on these 3 different pillars? The first pillar, when we talk about market, here we want to look at the market within our control and out of our control. Within our control, out of our control, we look at the legal and judicial risks. What kind of countries do you operate in? Is the foundation operating in Panama versus US versus Lisbon versus Singapore? It really depends, and understanding that gives us some understanding of to what degree and to what extent the external regulations, the external rules will impact us. We look at technological risks, and we look at community. The things that we can control is the community. Who are the economic agents in the space? Initially, you might have a lot of investors in your community because you have done fundraising. But the main goal that we want to move towards are actual users. If you're a game, having a lot of investors as your economic agent in your game might not be the best mechanism right now. We need to get the actual players coming in. So how do we create the right incentives, the right economic models to shift the economic agents from primarily investors to actual gamers? How do you work around that? So that's very important to understand, the market design. In mechanism design, we look at governance, we look at the financials, we look at economic transactions. This is, again, it's not about tokens, but how do people interact? What is the user retention rate like? What's the 7 days retention over here? How do people interact with each other? Are they interacting with smart contracts? Are they interacting with each other? Are they interacting with the virtual assets that you have in the game? Are they interacting with the DEXs? Are they interacting with the staking protocol that it's an insurance pool for the ecosystem? Understanding how user behaves gives us a lot of insights to how robust this economy is, how robust this ecosystem is. Because if people are primarily not really interacting with each other, they're just holding tokens, and sure, there's a lot of wallets, a lot of people holding tokens, but they're not doing anything with the tokens. They're just holding it and hoping prices will rise. That is not an economy. That's not an economy where people are interacting and transacting with each other. And when you do not have an economy where people are transacting and interacting, there is no market. There is nothing to talk about. Everyone is transacting outside of your market, and that's not a robust economy. And lastly, we move to tokens. Again, in tokens, we look at the kind of tokens in the ecosystem. What is the economic value that they are generating? When people think of economic value, they always think of what is the token prices like. If I want to do due diligence and figure out economic risk of my protocol, I need to figure out are prices appreciating. That, I get it, that's one perspective to look at things. The other alternative to look at is that tokens represent intrinsic value, a value for you to stay within this ecosystem. Otherwise, you can just exit, change this to US dollars, and go and participate in another ecosystem. So there is intrinsic value being generated by holding your tokens and participating in this ecosystem. Of course, it depends between a DEX, a lending protocol, a game, or an enterprise project. The intrinsic value of tokens can change drastically. That being said, it's important to understand the first principles, the fundamentals of why tokens exist in the first place, what intrinsic value it generates and gives to the token holders, and from there understand what kind of risks are involved with this intrinsic value. Can they be exploited? Can this intrinsic value adversely select for the wrong kind of economic agents? So, for example, there is a protocol, there was once a protocol, and what they do promotion, they help to bootstrap other people's ecosystem by giving out tokens as rewards. They give out the partners' tokens and their own tokens. The problem with this, it all sounds very good. You know, we're all co-sharing communities, we're all growing things together, and there's the intrinsic value there is to participate in another ecosystem. The economic risk over there is that it adversely selects for the wrong kind of economic agents. If you're giving financial incentive as a reason for people to come into your system, people are only there for the financial incentives. Once you start giving out free money, once you start giving out free tokens, they are going to leave. Because the reason for them coming into your protocol in the first place is that they're there for the value, for the monetary or financial value, the token value that's given to them. So that is a risk to consider. Now, one thing that's important, which I want to challenge you guys, is who should care about economic risks? We all talk about decentralization, the world should care about this, the World Economic Forum should participate in this, the BIS and World Bank and monetary policy, all from the protocol creators to all the token holders and communities, everyone should care about economic risks. Sure, in a perfect world, I agree with you. But this is the real world. In the real world, people are lazy. In the real world, people don't really care so much about so many things, right? So it's not about 1 or 0. It's not about complete decentralization or centralization. Who should care and who should not care? But it's a degree of who should care and to what extent they need to understand the details. Maybe not everyone needs to know the exact P&L of what's going on in the ecosystem, but at least there must be some level of information that's shared with the community. So the least involved is actually the active community. Yes, we would like to switch this around where active communities are most involved, but voters' apathy is a real thing, and that's why we put active community above, and then VCs and investors, and finally protocol creators and decision makers. As a protocol decision maker, as a protocol creator, you have the most vested interest to make sure that the protocol is going well. Why? Because VCs and active communities, they're all short-term and mid-term focused. As a protocol creator, you are long-term focused. When you're thinking long-term, when you're focusing long-term, you're creating the right kind of policies to generate value in the long run. It's not about pumping the tokens up, people extracting value and leaving the system. That is not what we're building here. In crypto, we're building something that stays. And to build something that stays, we need to think long-term. We need to build long-term plans, long-term value creation that accrues to the token holders, that accrues back to the economy. And that is what we want to do. And that's why we care about economic risks, not because it's something that impacts my P&L in the mid and short term, but how do I create value in the long run that generates value for everyone coming into the ecosystem. So, what are the risks looking like? Just like in traditional finance, we have idiosyncratic risks and systemic risks. Systemic risk is market risk, risks we cannot control, and idiosyncratic risks are risks within the protocol that we can control. And so I've divided this into 8 components, divided into systematic and idiosyncratic, for us to understand. With all these risks, we classify them and understand what we can control and what we cannot control. In systemic risk, things we cannot control will be the market, the users, the technology. We get to choose what users we want to select for, what technologies we want to use, what market and jurisdictions we want to be in, but there are a lot of things that's out of our control. What we can control are the idiosyncratic risks. This will be protocol risk, economic parameters, governance, financial risk, and liquidity risks. These are things that we can control, and these are things that as economists, as people doing due diligence, these are things that we can control, and when things go south in the protocol, that is something that we can tweak, we can manage, we can adjust from that. So, with that in mind, I want to conclude the presentation. You can scan the QR code to download the presentation and get a free consultation from us. And with that, Thank you. I'll be at the back answering questions.